class in our current unit, we're talking about different techniques and media that you can use on your sketchbook pages to create a ground, to alter the ground, and then to take a prompt or words or a quote, song lyrics, whatever it is, and do something creative with your space. So a lot of this is going to be based on the ideas that you come up with, and so it's really important to plan out what you're going to do first. And this isn't the extent of what I would want you guys to do for planning out your pages, but just to kind of show you visually like what I was thinking about. So I chose quotes that were based on opportunity and the power that we have to make our own opportunities, or the actions we have to take to make sure that we're moving forward in our life. So I picked, don't waste a minute not being happy. If one window closes, run to the next window or break down a door. And then the second one I chose is, if the door doesn't open, it's not your door. So these two quotes are going to work together, and I'm going to use both of them on my sketchbook spread that I create. And so first you want to think about, like, what can you draw or paint, what can you create for your artwork imagery wise. So for these, I want to show in my artwork maybe choices, represent choices or options, doors or windows that could be open or closed, or problems, hurdles that you have to jump through to solve, you know, how you're going to move forward. And I'm going to use maybe locks, doors, and windows as my imagery for that. So those will end up being what my focal point is. But before I start that, we've been talking about how to use chalk pastels and watercolor washes and different techniques to create a ground. Right now, my ground is just white paper, and white paper can be really intimidating because you're like, where do I start? What do I draw? Where should I put it on the page? And for us, we're going to be creating spreads. So you'll have a left and a right hand side where your artwork goes over the spiral, over the gutter of the book. So before we even get going with that, we're going back to, we looked at Eric Scott as inspiration and Lisa Oxley of how you treat your ground to kind of get going. And sometimes you might create artwork on a page, and then it might not end up being the page that you use for that artwork that you're about to create. You may change your mind while you're creating about color schemes or shapes or patterns and line work and things like that, and that's okay. But we're going to get started with using some materials. So I've got some watercolor pencils, I have a watercolor palette to use, I have some stencils, some drawing pencils, and some chalk pastels. So I'm going to start first by, I've already decided over here on my little start of a mind map on my planning what kind of color scheme I want. And I'm going to start off with some cool colors in the background. And we talked about when we did watercolor that you would want to keep your background, things that you're putting down before you put the artwork on top, want to keep it pretty subtle and keep it translucent and light. So we know with watercolor that means we want more water, less pigment. And that's because right now I'm not sure exactly where I want to put everything that's going to go on top. So I don't want to keep it do such like vibrant colors and such a busy background that I can't layer things on top of this. So I'm laying in some watercolor, doing wet on wet. We know that wet on wet means that I brushed water down on the page first, and then I added some pigment, and then I'm going to go back in with my Hake brush and bring this color down on the page, pick up a little bit more. And right now I'm not trying to make like a scene or an image or anything, I just want to get some color down. So if you want your color not to move around, just to kind of review what we talked about with watercolor, if you want it not to move around and to stay where you're putting it, you want to do wet on dry. And if you want to just get some subtle color in the background and you want it to move around and flow and have soft edges, we want to do wet on wet. Okay, I think I might add in a little bit of some green too. Now there are some things that you can do just to kind of review what we've been talking about the last few days with the paper still wet, but you have to decide like what you want it to look like, and then what are the steps you need to take to get there And then can you keep working on this, or do you need it to dry? So we have hair dryers that you can use, or you can work on a separate piece of paper. Like I'm going to make my door separately, and then it will be attached to this page later on. So you have options. Don't ever sit in class and just watch paint dry. You should always have something going on. But if you really need to work on this page and it needs to be dry, ask Miss Holland or Miss Inky for a hair dryer, and you can quick dry this, and then you can go ahead and keep working. But we also talked about different things that you can do while the paper is still wet. So we've got our watercolor pencils that you can use, and you just want to decide like what is your color scheme going to be. And we looked at Eric Scott does a lot of using templates to draw those shapes, and then uses a paintbrush to pull that color out. So this creates containers on your sketchbook page where you can go back in and you could journal in these, you could collage in these, you can draw in them, but it gives you an intentional place to go and put something in later on. So you want to decide where these are going to go, but then later on you don't have to so much decide where you're going to start drawing things. So you can use watercolor pencils on dry paper or on wet paper. They're a little more vibrant on the wet paper, but either way it works. Okay, so I went and took this to the hairdryer, dried my background, got my 3 circles. On the top one, I did an example of, while the paper was still wet, what the watercolor pencil looks like. So this is good if you want more like a mark making to show up. The color is very vibrant, but it doesn't blend as much as far as like getting smooth color. Down here, I did this after I used the hair dryer. So the paper is still a little bit damp, but for the most part, it's pretty dry. And then I'm just using my color pencil like I normally would, watercolor pencil. And then you can take your wet brush and go back into it and activate that watercolor pigment and go out and blend it out, or do whatever kind of techniques you want to at that point. So you get a little bit, still the vibrancy, but you get a little bit more of a smooth, even blend with this. So just to kind of review what we talked about already with watercolor pencils. Watercolor pencils are cool because a lot of people don't like watercolor paint because they feel like they don't have a lot of control over it, and that's true until you get some practice with it. But watercolor pencils sort of feel like using a colored pencil, so you have full control over where you're putting your color, and then you can go back over it with water to make it have the appearance of that watery vibe. So this circle is a different look than up here, and then you can just kind of decide like which one you like. I'll probably go in this one, and just to balance it and repeat what I did up there on the top. Other things you can do, another thing we talked about on the presentation was adding in collage work or lines and shapes and patterns to add interest to your work. So those shapes and patterns might not have a whole lot to do with what you're doing for your theme, or they might. Like I've got some stencils here, and I could go in and put in some words, like I could put doors or hurdles or decisions, or come up with some stuff that goes with it. But you can also do something that's just visual. So we have some stencils that you guys can use. If you have a plastic stencil, it needs to be sanitized when you're done using it. So just make sure, we'll have some sitting out, but if you use a stencil, it needs to go in the dirty bin. But I'm going to use some chalk pastels, and I still want to keep a little bit close to my color theme here. And I'll just use a paper towel over here to the side of my sketchbook, and I'm going to take this sort of like blue-green, dark greenish chalk pastel, and just to get some pigment on it like that. And then you can use your finger or another piece of paper towel if you want, or even like a dry paintbrush would work, and lay down your stencil where you want to add in some type of a pattern. And of course you could just draw this, but if you want to have it repeating in a way where it looks the same each time, you can apply it through the use of a stencil. And then I can pick and choose, which areas do I want to draw through the shape. And you can have it be subtle and just do a couple of lines, or you can have it be more vibrant. And you can use chalk pastels on wet or on dry paper. It actually looks very painterly to do chalk pastels on wet paper and then go back over it with a brush. It looks a whole lot like watercolor, the way that the pigment becomes fluid. So you can add this in, and one way to create unity in your piece, meaning like everything, every element that you've chosen to incorporate feels like it belongs on the page, is to repeat different elements of art in different places. So the colors, the shapes, the different things that you're drawing or painting or collaging. Do it in more than one place, because sometimes it feels sort of random if you just do it once. So I'm going to take my same stencil that I just used there, and I'm going to add in just a few of these same bars down here on the bottom of my page. And these sketchbook prompt spreads are just an opportunity for you to be creative. So we've talked about how the elements of art are building blocks for you to use and create your artwork with, and use them either effectively or ineffectively. But artists generally work in sketchbooks when they're trying out new things or trying out a new composition, because you're not committing a lot of time or energy or material to a sketchbook page. But later on, if you love this, if you love what you made, it could become a larger piece. It could also just be standalone artwork in your sketchbook. So now I've got an altered ground that I can draw things on top of. I could journal around in these spaces. I can collage on this. Remember that collage should be an element to your piece. You're not cutting out full-on images from the magazines and then gluing them down to become your focal point. You might cut out, like I might cut out linear strips of something that's maybe like a pop of orange or red, and put it radiating out from one of these circles. So it's a design element, but it's not, I'm not relying on a photo of a person or a place or a car or whatever and cutting it out and making it the artwork. Okay, it should support the artwork on here. So from this point, I might let this dry, or I might add some more, finish this circle down here, and then decide what I'm going to draw, or I might work on a page alteration. And now I want to make a door that I'm going to attach here that's going to be separate, that will swing up, and I'll have a drawing or maybe my quote back behind it. So this is just one layer of my artwork I'm going to add to this. You don't want to rely on just this for it to be your prompt spreads, but this is just a way where even if you don't have what your prompt is yet, you could create these grounds if you have free time in your sketchbook, and then go back later on and you can create observational drawings or whatever on top of this, and it just makes your artwork look more interesting.